The sun was setting behind the dense canopy of the ancient forest, casting long, eerie shadows that danced like specters on the forest floor. Mayuki and Haruto, a young couple from Tokyo, had decided to spend a quiet weekend camping in the remote wilderness of the Akigahara forest. The forest, known for its dark history and legends, seemed like the perfect place for an adventurous getaway. They arrived at the campsite as twilight began to envelop the surroundings. The air was thick with the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves, mingling with the faint fragrance of distant pine trees. A narrow dirt path led them deeper into the heart of the forest, where they found a small clearing, perfect for setting up their tent. Mayuki, a nature enthusiast, marveled at the beauty of their secluded spot. Tall trees with gnarled branches encircled the clearing, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. The ground was soft and covered with a carpet of fallen leaves, creating a natural cushion underfoot. As they pitched their tent, the silence of the forest was broken only by the occasional chirp of a bird or the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Haruto, always the practical one, ensured their campsite was in order, arranging their supplies and setting up a small campfire. The flickering flames cast a warm, inviting glow, contrasting starkly with the encroaching darkness. With everything in place, they settled down for a simple dinner, sharing stories and laughter under the starless sky. But as night fell, an unsettling stillness took hold. The once comforting sounds of the forest grew ominous, and an inexplicable sense of unease began to creep into their hearts. It was then that Haruto mentioned the legend of the cursed campsite. According to local lore, this part of the forest was haunted by the spirits of those who had lost their way and perished within its depths. These restless souls, it was said, sought to claim the lives of unsuspecting visitors, drawing them deeper into the woods with phantom whispers and spectral apparitions. Mayuki, though skeptical, couldn't shake the chill that ran down her spine. She tried to dismiss it as mere superstition, but the oppressive darkness and the eerie silence seemed to amplify every creak and rustle. After dinner, they decided to explore the immediate area. Armed with a flashlight, the beam of light cut through the inky blackness, revealing twisted roots and ancient trees that seemed to loom menacingly. They ventured a little further from their campsite, following a narrow trail that wound through the forest. As they walked, they felt an uncanny sensation, as if unseen eyes were watching them from the shadows. Suddenly, Haruto stopped, his face pale and tense. He pointed towards a large, moss-covered stone at the edge of the trail. Mayuki squinted in the dim light, her breath catching in her throat as she saw what he was pointing at. Carved into the stone were strange symbols, barely visible under the thick layer of moss. The markings were crude and ancient, unlike anything they had seen before. Haruto reached out to touch the stone, but Mayuki grabbed his arm, her voice trembling. "Don't," she whispered. "It doesn't feel right." Haruto nodded, withdrawing his hand. They quickly turned back towards their campsite, their pace quickening as the sense of unease grew stronger. Back at the campsite, they tried to shake off the strange encounter, but the atmosphere had changed. The forest, once a haven of peace and tranquility, now felt like a living entity, breathing and watching their every move. As they settled into their tent, the oppressive silence was punctuated by the distant hoot of an owl and the occasional snap of a twig. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, it was filled with disturbing dreams of shadowy figures and disembodied whispers. Mayuki dreamed of wandering through the forest, lost and alone, while ghostly hands reached out to drag her into the darkness. Haruto dreamed of the ancient stone, its symbols glowing with an eerie light, beckoning him closer. When they awoke, the sense of dread had not dissipated. The morning light did little to dispel the darkness that seemed to cling to their thoughts. Determined to make the most of their trip, they decided to explore further, hoping to uncover the secrets of the forest and put their fears to rest. They packed a small backpack with essentials and set off, following the same trail they had taken the previous night. The forest was eerily quiet, and the shadows seemed to shift and move, playing tricks on their eyes. As they walked, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. They reached the stone again, its ancient symbols now more visible in the daylight. Mayuki took a closer look, her curiosity piqued despite her fear. "These symbols," she murmured, "they seem to tell a story." Haruto, though wary, was intrigued. He pulled out his phone and took several pictures of the carvings. "We should research this when we get back," he suggested, trying to mask his apprehension with a veneer of scientific curiosity. As they continued their exploration, they stumbled upon another clearing, smaller than their campsite. In the center stood a lone, twisted tree, its bark dark and gnarled, as if scarred by time itself. Mayuki felt a chill as she approached the tree, a sense of foreboding growing with each step. She noticed something hanging from one of the lower branches, a small, weathered charm, swaying gently in the breeze. It was an omamori, a Japanese talisman typically used for protection. But this one felt different, as if it had absorbed the fear and despair of whoever had left it there. Haruto too sensed the dark aura surrounding the tree. "We should go back," he said, his voice tight with unease. Mayuki nodded, and they turned to leave. But a sudden rustling in the bushes made them freeze. A figure emerged from the shadows, shrouded in a tattered cloak. The face was hidden, but the aura of malevolence was unmistakable. The figure moved closer, and they could see the gleam of cold, lifeless eyes beneath the hood. Panic surged through them, and they bolted back towards their campsite, hearts pounding and breaths ragged. When they finally reached the safety of their tent, they collapsed, trembling and breathless. "What was that?" Mayuki gasped, her eyes wide with fear. Haruto shook his head, unable to find the words. They huddled together, the reality of their situation sinking in. The forest was not just a place of beauty and tranquility. It was a realm of darkness and ancient evil. As the day wore on, they debated whether to stay or leave. But the thought of navigating the forest at night filled them with dread. They decided to wait until morning, hoping the daylight would bring some semblance of safety. As night fell once again, the oppressive silence returned, and with it, the feeling of being watched. They sat by the campfire, its flames their only comfort against the encroaching darkness. The legend of the cursed campsite seemed all too real now, and they couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Suddenly, a chilling whisper floated through the air, barely audible but unmistakable. It seemed to come from all around them, echoing through the trees. Mayuki and Haruto clung to each other, their fear palpable. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, until it was a cacophony of voices, each one more desperate and anguished than the last. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the whispering ceased, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. They stared at each other, too terrified to speak. It was clear that the forest was not going to let them leave easily. They were trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by unseen forces that sought to claim their souls. As the night wore on, the whispers returned, more menacing than before. Mayuki and Haruto knew they had to find a way to escape, but the darkness seemed impenetrable, and the forest a labyrinth of shadows. Their only hope was to survive until morning and make a desperate bid for freedom. With their hearts pounding and fear gripping their every thought, they braced themselves for the long, terrifying night ahead. Little did they know, the true horror was yet to come, lurking just beyond the edge of their fragile sanity. The first rays of dawn filtered through the dense canopy, casting a pale light over the campsite. Mayuki and Haruto had barely slept, their minds racing with fear and unease. The forest, bathed in the soft morning light, seemed less menacing but no less mysterious. They decided to leave as soon as possible, hoping to put the eerie night behind them. As they packed their belongings, Mayuki noticed something strange. The ground around their tent was marked with unusual footprints. They were not from any animal she recognized, and their presence only heightened her sense of dread. Haruto examined them closely, his expression darkening. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice steady but urgent. They hurriedly finished packing and set off towards the trail, that led back to civilization. As they walked, the forest seemed to close in around them, the trees looming tall and ominous. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. They followed the trail for what felt like hours, but the landscape seemed unfamiliar, as if the forest itself had changed overnight. The path twisted and turned in ways they didn't remember, leading them deeper into the woods instead of out. Panic began to set in as they realized they were lost. Mayuki's breath quickened, and she gripped Haruto's hand tightly. "Are we going the right way?" she asked, her voice trembling. Haruto glanced around, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but we have to keep moving." They pressed on, hoping to find a recognizable landmark. The forest, however, remained a maze of shadows and whispers. As they walked, the air grew colder, and an unnatural fog began to seep through the trees, obscuring their vision. The fog thickened, turning the forest into a ghostly labyrinth. Visibility was reduced to a few feet, and every sound seemed amplified, echoing through the mist. They came upon another clearing, this one even more eerie than the last. In the center stood an ancient stone well, covered in moss and ivy. The well exuded an aura of age and mystery, as if it held secrets long forgotten. Haruto approached the well cautiously, peering over for example. The darkness within seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing the light of his flashlight. "There's something down there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mayuki shivered, her fear mounting. "Let's not stay here," she urged, pulling him away from the well. As they turned to leave, they heard a faint sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. It was the same voice they had heard the night before, now clearer and more insistent. The whispers grew louder, more coherent, forming words they could almost understand. The fog thickened around them, and the forest seemed to close in, the trees appearing to move closer. Panic gripped them as they realized they were being surrounded. They ran, their footsteps echoing through the mist, the whispers following them, growing ever louder. They stumbled through the forest, disoriented and terrified, until they burst into another clearing. This one was different. The air was colder, and the ground was littered with strange objects, broken dolls, old photographs, and rusted tools. In the center of the clearing stood an old, dilapidated shrine. The shrine was in ruins, its wood rotting and covered in vines. Yet, despite its decrepit state, it emanated a powerful presence. As if it was the heart of the forest's malevolence, Haruto and Mayuki approached the shrine, cautiously, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion. As they neared, they noticed an old wooden box at the foot of the shrine. The box was intricately carved with the same symbols they had seen on the stone. Mayuki reached out to touch it, but Haruto stopped her. "We don't know what it is," he warned, his voice tense. Mayuki nodded, but her curiosity was piqued. "We need to find out," she insisted. "Maybe it holds the key to what's happening." Haruto hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. Using a stick, he carefully pried open the box. Inside, they found a collection of old scrolls, yellowed with age. The scrolls were covered in writing and drawings, depicting rituals and ceremonies. As they examined the scrolls, they realized they were instructions for a purification. Ritual meant to cleanse the forest of its curses. The ritual required specific items, many of which were scattered around the clearing. Haruto and Mayuki quickly gathered the necessary items. Following the instructions on the scrolls, they worked with a sense of urgency, driven by the need to escape the forest's grip. As they performed the ritual, the whispers grew louder, more agitated. The fog thickened, swirling around them like a living entity. With the final incantation, the fog exploded in a blinding flash of light. The whispers ceased abruptly, and the forest fell silent. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the fog began to dissipate, revealing the familiar landscape of the forest. They found themselves back on the trail, the way out now clear and unmistakable. Relief washed over them as they hurried back to their car, the oppressive atmosphere lifting with each step. As they drove away, they couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching them, its dark secrets still lurking in the shadows. The experience left them shaken, but they vowed never to speak of it again, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. But deep in their hearts, they knew that the forest's curse was not so easily broken. The ancient evil still lurked within, waiting for its next victims to stumble into its grasp. The memory of the cursed campsite would haunt them forever, a reminder of the dark forces that lay hidden in the depths of the Aokigahara forest. The road ahead was winding and narrow, bordered by towering trees that formed a dense, impenetrable wall on either side. As Mayuki and Haruto drove away from the cursed forest, the tension in the car was palpable. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and lingering dread. They had escaped the immediate danger, but the memory of the nightmarish experience clung to them like a shadow. The daylight brought some relief, but the events they had witnessed felt surreal and haunting. Mayuki stared out the window, her mind racing with questions. "What do you think that ritual was?" she asked, breaking the silence. Haruto tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road. "I'm not sure," he replied, "but it seemed to have some effect." The whispers stopped, and the fog cleared. Mayuki nodded, but her unease persisted. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Haruto sighed, glancing at her with weary eyes. "I hope so," he said, "but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this forest than we understand." They continued driving in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The road took them through a series of small villages where life seemed to carry on as usual, oblivious to the horrors they had experienced. As they neared the town of Fujikawagachiko, they decided to stop for a break. The quaint town, with its picturesque views of Mount Fuji, offered a stark contrast to the dark forest they had left behind. They found a small cafe and ordered coffee, hoping the familiar surroundings would help them regain a sense of normalcy. But even in the bustling cafe, the shadow of the forest loomed over them. Mayuki noticed an elderly man at a nearby table, watching them intently. His eyes held a knowing look, as if he could sense the fear that lingered in their hearts. After a moment, the man approached their table, his gait slow but deliberate. "Excuse me," he said in a soft, gravely voice, "but you two look like you've seen a ghost." Mayuki and Haruto exchanged uneasy glances before Haruto spoke. "We had a strange experience in the Aokigahara forest," he said cautiously. The man's expression darkened, and he nodded slowly. "The sea of trees," he murmured. "Many have ventured there and never returned. It is a place of great sorrow and restless spirits." Mayuki felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you know anything about the rituals or the symbols we saw?" she asked, hoping for some clarity. The man sighed, taking a seat at their table. "My name is Takashi," he began, "and I have lived in this region all my life. The forest has always been a place of mystery and danger. The symbols you saw are ancient, part of a forgotten tradition meant to protect the living from the dead." He paused, his eyes distant as if recalling a painful memory. "Many years ago, my own father disappeared in that forest," he continued. "He was a shaman, tasked with maintaining the balance between the living and the spirits. He left behind these rituals, hoping to guide those who might find themselves lost in the darkness." Haruto leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Do you think the ritual we performed actually worked?" he asked. Takashi shrugged. "It may have temporarily appeased the spirits," he said, "but the forest's curse is deep and ancient. It will take more than a single ritual to cleanse it completely." Mayuki's heart sank at his words. "So what do we do now?" she asked, feeling a sense of hopelessness. Takashi regarded them with a solemn expression. "You must find the source of the curse," he said, "and put an end to it. Only then can the spirits be at peace." Haruto and Mayuki exchanged a determined look. They had come this far, they couldn't turn back now. Takashi gave them a small, reassuring smile. "Stay the night here," he suggested. "Rest and gather your strength. Tomorrow, I will help you prepare for your journey back into the forest. They agreed, grateful for his offer of assistance. That night, in the safety of a local inn, Mayuki and Haruto tried to piece together everything they had learned. The realization that they had to return to the forest filled them with dread, but they knew it was the only way to end the nightmare. Morning came too quickly, and with it, a renewed sense of urgency. Takashi met them at the inn, bringing with him various items, talismans, herbs, and other tools that would aid them in their quest. He explained each item's significance and how they would use them to protect themselves and perform the final ritual. As they prepared to leave, Takashi handed them a map marked with key locations within the forest. This map was passed down from my father, he said. It will guide you to the heart of the forest where the curse originated. Mayuki and Haruto thanked him, their resolve strengthened by his support. They set off once again, the familiar path, leading them back into the depths of the Akigahara forest. The forest was just as they remembered, dark, silent, and foreboding. But this time, they were armed with knowledge and the means to fight back. They followed the map, moving cautiously through the dense undergrowth. The talismans Takashi had given them seemed to ward off the oppressive atmosphere, creating a small bubble of safety around them. As they delved deeper, the air grew colder and the shadows lengthened. The forest seemed to reek to their presence, the whispers returning, more insistent and malevolent. They reached the first marked location, an old, abandoned shrine, similar to the one they had found before. Following Takashi's instructions, they performed a cleansing ritual, using their herbs and talismans to purify the area. The whispers grew louder, but the ritual seemed to have an effect, creating a sense of calm and clarity. They continued their journey, performing rituals at each marked location. With each step, the forest's resistance grew stronger, the whispers turning into anguished cries. It was as if the spirits were desperately trying to prevent them from reaching their goal. As night fell, they reached the final location, a large, ancient tree, its twisted branches reaching skyward like skeletal fingers. The tree emanated a powerful, malevolent energy, and they knew they had found the source of the curse. Haruto and Mayuki set up their final ritual, their hands trembling with fear and anticipation. The air around them crackled with energy, the whispers now a deafening roar. They began the incantation, their voices rising above the cacophony. The tree seemed to reek, its branches swaying violently as if trying to shake them off, but they pressed on, drawing upon the strength Takashi had given them. With a final, powerful incantation, the tree let out a piercing wail, the sound reverberating through the forest. The ground shook, and a blinding light enveloped them. When the light faded, the forest was silent once more. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a serene calm. Mayuki and Haruto looked at each other, exhausted but triumphant. They had done it. The curse was broken. They made their way back through the forest, the path now clear and welcoming. As they emerged from the trees, they felt a sense of relief and closure. The nightmare was finally over. Back in Fujikuwagachiko, they met with Takashi, who greeted them with a proud smile. "You have done well," he said. "The spirits are at peace, and the forest is free from its curse." Mayuki and Haruto thanked him, grateful for his guidance and support. As they drove away from the town, they felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The memory of the cursed campsite would always remain, but they knew they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The Akigahara forest was now just a place of natural beauty. Its dark past finally laid to rest, the journey back to Tokyo was a blur of emotions for Mayuki and Haruto. They had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged victorious, yet the experience had left an indelible mark on their souls. The city, with its bustling streets and neon lights, seemed almost surreal after the oppressive silence of the Akigahara forest. As they settled back into their daily routines, they tried to put the nightmare behind them, but the memories lingered, haunting their thoughts and dreams. Mayuki found herself waking in the middle of the night, heart pounding, as fragments of the forest's darkness replayed in her mind. Haruto too was troubled by the experience. His once steady demeanor now marked by a quiet, introspective tension. One evening, as they sat in their small apartment, Haruto broke the silence. "We need to talk about what happened," he said, his voice soft but insistent. Mayuki nodded, understanding the weight of his words. They had avoided discussing the details, each hoping that silence would help them heal, but the unspoken fear hung between them, like a specter, and it was time to confront it. "We survived," Mayuki began, her voice trembling. "But I can't shake the feeling that it's not over." Haruto looked at her, his eyes reflecting the same unease. "I feel it too," he admitted. "It's as if the forest left a part of itself with us." They sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of their ordeal settling over them. "We need to understand what happened," Haruto said finally. "We need to find a way to make peace with it." The next day, they visited a local library, hoping to find more information about the Akigahara forest and its dark history. They spent hours poring over old books and articles, uncovering stories of disappearances, strange phenomena, and ancient rituals. One book, in particular, caught Mayuki's attention. It was a collection of local legends and folklore, filled with tales of spirits and curses. As she read through it, she found a section that detailed the very symbols and rituals they had encountered in the forest. The book described a powerful curse placed on the forest centuries ago, meant to trap the spirits of those who died there, preventing them from finding peace. It spoke of a final ritual, one that could truly cleanse the forest and free the trapped souls. Mayuki's heart raced as she read the instructions. It was a more complex and dangerous ritual than the one they had performed, requiring a deeper understanding of the spiritual forces at play. "We need to do this," she said, showing the book to Haruto. He read through the passage, his face pale but determined. "We can't let the forest's curse continue," he agreed. "But this ritual, it's risky." Mayuki nodded, understanding the danger. But they had come this far, and they couldn't turn back now. They gathered the necessary items and prepared themselves for the journey back to the forest. The thought of returning filled them with dread, but they knew it was the only way to put an end to the curse once and for all. As they drove towards the Akigahara forest, the familiar landscape grew increasingly ominous. The memories of their previous ordeal resurfaced, but they steeled themselves, knowing they had a purpose. They reached the edge of the forest, just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the dense canopy. With the book as their guide, they ventured back into the heart of the forest, following the same path they had taken before. The atmosphere was just as oppressive, the silence deep and unnerving. But this time, they were not unprepared. They reached the ancient tree that had been the source of the curse, its twisted branches silhouetted against the darkening sky. The air was thick with tension, the whispers, returning, more insistent and desperate. Haruto and Mayuki set up the ritual, their hands shaking with fear and anticipation. They began the incantation, their voices rising above the cacophony of whispers. The forest seemed to reek, the ground trembling and the air crackling with energy. As they performed the ritual, they felt a presence watching them, an ancient, malevolent force that resisted their every effort. But they pressed on, their determination unwavering. With a final, powerful incantation, the tree let out a piercing wail. The sound reverberating through the forest, the ground shook violently, and a blinding light enveloped them. When the light faded, the forest was silent once more. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a serene calm. Mayuki and Haruto looked at each other, exhausted but triumphant. They had done it. The curse was broken. The forest felt different now, as if a great weight had been lifted. The air was fresh and clear, the whispers silenced. They made their way back through the forest, the path now clear and welcoming. As they emerged from the trees, they felt a sense of relief and closure. The nightmare was finally over. Back in Tokyo, they tried to return to their normal lives, but the experience had changed them, deepening their bond and giving them a new appreciation for life. They spoke often of the forest and the ordeal they had faced, using their story to warn others of the dangers that lurked within the Aokigahara forest. The memory of the cursed campsite would always remain, but they knew they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The Aokigahara forest was now just a place of natural beauty, its dark past finally laid to rest, but deep in their hearts, they knew that the echoes of the forest would stay with them forever, a reminder of the thin veil between the world of the living and the realm of the spirits.